Hey everybody, it's Eric alongside Rod here to talk about MSU's upcoming game against New Mexico in the second round of the NCAA Tournament with a slot in the Sweet 16 on the line. Before we begin, a quick word of thanks to our awesome supporters to the show. Patreon supporters at the Mateen Cleaves level: Bill Church, Brian O'Donnell, Michael Bosnick, Chad Hickey, Mike Huntoon, and Scott Driscoll. Draymond Green supporters: Adam Walzak, Dan Rankin, James Benton, Jim L., David Brame, Paul Marsh, Doug Robinson, and Daniel Dranak, and all the Scott Scowl supporters on both Patreon and YouTube, as well as Rich Wagenheim, Kenneth Cremett, Roger Bronsick, Al, Michael Emmerich, and Joe in VT on Substack. We really appreciate the support, guys. It really means a lot to us. If you want to support the show, please head on over to our support page at the finals for us on theschedule.com/support, where you can find all the necessary links to either be a one-time or recurring supporter of the show. All right, Rod. So Michigan State survives a very late night game that actually finished this morning as we're recording this. And so they had the privilege of taking on Richard Pitino for the second time in the NCAA tournament. Again, in the second round, like except last time he was at the helm at Minnesota. Uh, the Lobos are 27-7 overall this year, coming out of the Mountain West, which has had, I guess, sort of middling sort of performance in the NCAA tournament in the past. This year being no different than previous years, I guess you'd say. They are number 40 in KenPom, so good team, solid team. And they beat Marquette in the first round and took out Shaka Smart. So it's going to be a sort of a strange matchup in the second round for Michigan State, one way or the other. Either they're going to get Shaka Smart for the second time with Marquette, or they get Richard Pitino for a second time in the second round. So here they are. It's the first time that New Mexico has made it to the second round in 13 years, uh,
Yeah,
which is interesting that it's been, because I think was the last time with Steve Alford they got in the first round?
probably. Yeah, Steve Alford had a nice. That was where he went after he left Iowa, got out of town just ahead of the posse. Um,
Yeah.
seriously, and
Oh, yeah, no question.
and rehabbed his career because it was after New Mexico that he got the UCLA job. But he had a really nice run in New Mexico, and I don't know if it's fully appreciated in part because they haven't had huge seasons in recent decades, but New Mexico is historically a pretty good job. They call their arena in Albuquerque the Pit, and it has had a reputation for being an extremely difficult place to play for a long, long time. And that's been a place, it's one of these schools like, oh, for a long time, Tulsa had that reputation. That was kind of a cradle of coaches. They had a bunch of, I mean, Nolan Richardson, Bill Self, Tubby Smith. They had a bunch of guys go through there, and it just was one of those places. Dayton, for a long time, has had that reputation. These
Right.
mid-major or mid-major plus schools that just have it together, that for the most part, across the years, across multiple coaches, prove to be places that you can win. And that's how I would think of New Mexico. Richard Pitino got fired by Minnesota, and I think it was almost immediately got hired by New Mexico. I don't think he sat out a year. I think he went right into it. And to his credit, he's taken the resources that exist at that job and turn them back into a very solid program. This is their second straight NCAA tournament bid. Last year, they got there because they won the Mountain West Conference tournament. If memory serves, I don't think they would have gotten in but for that. This year, they didn't have to do that. They won the regular season. They did not win the conference tournament, but it didn't matter because they'd done enough to get an at-large bid. And frankly, they're a better team this year. But it's definitely a good place for somebody like Richard Pitino to go. He's rebuilt his career, and if you believe the rumor mill, there's a reasonable shot that he ends up back in a high major job this year. We'll see how it all pans out in the end. But as I saw one talking head reference last night, and I would agree with this, it's got to be the right job because the one he's got right now is actually pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, if you're a coach, what do you want? I mean, obviously, your money, resources in order to be successful, but you're sort of remembered by your post conference, I should say postseason runs, which is the NCAA tournament. And, if you're in a place where you can get there routinely and you have the players to compete on a
Yeah.
level where you can be successful in the NCAA tournament. Unless you think you're going to go to some place that's going to give you a lot deeper runs, or you're going to get there more reliably. You have every reason to stick around where you are. Yeah,
You
obviously,
you
like the SEC or something like Big Ten, it's a lot easier to make the NCAA tournament just in the sense that there's just more bids available. So that's
yeah,
one advantage.
but caveat to that. The Mountain West is generally, and they're not just a multi-bid league. I mean, they're like this year they had four.
Right.
And that's pretty standard, I think,
Hmm.
for them in recent years. So it is a multi-bid league. You don't have, like this year proved it. You don't have to win that tournament by any means to get into the big dance. Um, you could make an argument. I mean, it depends on perceptions and all of that stuff, but you could make an argument that New Mexico might be a better job in some ways than say Minnesota.
Sure. Yeah. No, I
And
agree. Hmm.
it's I'm not saying it's a definitive argument, but there is a case you could make. And so I do think whoever, I can't remember who it was, Gary Parrish, somebody like that, was talking about how, he's got it pretty good where he's at. So he's likely not going to jump just because a high major makes him an offer. It's got to be the right job. And I would agree with that. At least to me, that makes sense. He's in a great spot. He's in a league that gets multiple bids every year, and he's at one of, I would say, the premier programs in that league. New
Right.
Mexico, with its fan support, its tradition, its resources, I think trends toward the higher end of the Mountain West in most of the ways that are meaningful. And so that's a good spot. Like you
Yeah.
say, you're remembered for postseason runs. Well, if you keep getting into it regularly, you keep knocking at the door, you would think eventually it's going to open.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that conference, you've got San Diego State, which has sort of been a perennial power
Yep.
recently for the last decade plus. New Mexico's always been pretty good. Occasionally, New Mexico State, and recently, sort of Colorado State, Utah State. There are about, a few teams there that are always there. It's interesting because the Mountain West, the
Boise,
conference,
I mean, it
yeah,
rotates
Boise,
a little
right.
bit, but
But it's a conference you don't think about too much. Us here in the Midwest, I think. I mean, I don't think about it a whole lot. But then you
it,
look at it compared to like teams, places you might see more traditionally, like the A10, and they're getting more bids in the A10
oh, it's a
conference.
better league.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
it has moved beyond that league at this point for sure.
I would say even historically, because the thing you got to remember is the Mountain West is really in large part the successor to the old WAC. Now the
Right,
Western Athletic Conference still exists, but the membership is almost entirely different than it was in the 70s, 80s, 90s.
right.
The WAC was always a really good league, and the Mountain West has continued to be a really good league. I would say I got to think about this. I mean, if we think of, as I do, the Big East as a high major league, then I would say year in, year out, the Mountain West is probably the premier mid-major plus league out there.
Yeah,
It's better than the A10 on a year in, year out basis, I think. Um, and so it's not surprising. I've seen some stuff this week which I guess there's some validity to. I hadn't realized it, that the Mountain West NCAA tournament performance, the way its teams have actually played when they've gotten there in recent years, has been terrible. Not
yeah,
so bad this year. They went 2-2 in the first round. Colorado State beat Memphis, and then obviously New Mexico beat Marquette. Those are two pretty good wins. But I guess historically, at least in recent years, the performance once they get there has not been great. But man, year in, year out, they're putting teams in that thing. And that's not bias. That happens because of the non-conference performance that that league tends to put up in November and December.
yeah. Well, and we've talked about this before about the Big Ten. When you look at overall conference performances, you are somewhat, the more teams you get in, it sometimes is at your detriment to your league if you're a league that gets multi bids, like sort of a lot of them. And that I think was sort of a problem with the Mountain West the last couple of years. They had a lot of teams get in, but they're all like 12 to
Yeah.
9 seeds. And
Yep.
so, you are supposed to lose those games, by
Right.
seeding purposes. And so it makes it look, and just like this tournament, well, they had two teams at 12 and a 10 win, and they had a 9 and a 10 lose. So it's not like they're getting in, not like they're three seeds losing, although they have, New Mexico has been that way in the past when Alfred was there on rare occasion, or San Diego State. But anyway, the point is that the overall record maybe doesn't always tell the whole story, because these are not exactly, they're good
Yes.
teams, but we're not talking about, this is not Gonzaga, this is not Duke, right? That are
They
losing in
are
the first round.
they are teams that by seed and by usually by Vegas point spread, you would expect to lose these games. So you're
Yeah.
right. That also tends to distort the picture a bit.
Yeah. So, I
Um,
mean, because we just noticed in this year, the Big Ten was expected to win all 8 games by seeding purposes, and they did, which is the
right.
first time they've ever done that. I think the best record ever by the most
It
wins,
is.
and 8-0 was the best record ever by any conference
Yep.
history league.
And
So they
and
were
by the
helped by
way,
Indiana being, and Nebraska and Ohio State being left out of the field in some ways.
they got the perception got helped. By the way, not only did they all win, they all covered. All
Right.
eight. Even Michigan by a half point
Right.
covered the spread. Pretty remarkable.
Yeah.
And it does go to show you. I mean, look, we're recording this on Saturday morning. I don't expect this to continue, as we talked about last night. Looks to me like it's about 50-50 in these second round games in terms of whether the Big Ten team is expected to win. But it was a hell of a start. You couldn't have asked for anything more.
Yeah. And they definitely, the Big Ten definitely need that from a perception standpoint the last couple of years. All right, let's talk about New Mexico. And we'll start on offense. New Mexico is a number 74 overall, which is partly because they don't shoot the ball very well. As anyone watched that 7-10 matchup last night, they're 163rd from threes. They shoot 34% now. Of course, that's better than Michigan State, which is barely over
Not that
30%.
much. Not
Well,
that
yeah,
much.
Michigan State's like 31% now, probably from the field
Yeah.
for the season. Now, of course, we're not talking about recent, like last 10 games. We're talking just the whole season. And then they're 198th from two, so even worse. They're not good at the free throw line. They're just 69% of their free throws, and they get there quite a bit. They're 45th in a foul rate. Michigan State's 50th, so they'd expect to get about the same amount of free throws per game as Michigan State. They don't offensive rebound very well. They're 127th there, and they're pretty good. They're 78th as far as turnovers. So they don't turn the ball over a whole lot. And so it's kind of it's basically the profile of a number 74 offense.
Yeah, this is not a great offensive team, and that doesn't mean they can't score, obviously, but there's really nothing other than drawing fouls and
Missing free throws.
mitigating turnovers that really stands out as a positive. They're not. Now they shot pretty well. I forget what the game total was against Marquette from three. I know they got off to a very good start shooting threes in that game. So did Marquette. And neither of those teams came into that game with good 3-point shooting profiles. We saw that with Michigan State last night, right?
Yeah.
You never know. And yet I think New Mexico you can fairly describe as a nondescript offense. The one thing that's not in these numbers that we'll talk about a couple of times probably, they are very, very dependent upon their transition offense, and
Right.
they have been very good in that area. They are a peer of Michigan State's when it comes to scoring on the break. And so that's a big, big part of what the Lobos have to do if they're going to stay in this game. I think they've got to be able to get into transition and score, because when you look at their profile, what they do in the half court, it it just becomes too laborious for them over the
It looked
course of
that way
40
last night.
minutes. Yeah,
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
does. And it's funny because they've got a high level point guard.
Hmm.
And so normally what goes along with that is some level of offensive efficiency. If you've got a guy that can actually both score himself and create for others, and they do, you expect something positive in the overall picture. And it just hasn't worked out that way for New Mexico. They just don't have enough guys that can convert those kind of opportunities, can go make plays on their own at times. It just kind of things stagnate in the half court for them.
All right, so then moving on to the other side of the court on defense, New Mexico is much better. They're 18th overall, which is very good, obviously, and that's I guess borderline elite, right? When you're top 20 or so.
Yep,
By comparison,
absolutely.
Michigan State is fifth. So these are two very good defensive teams. They're very good against the two at 67th. They have a really high block rate. They're 14th in the country in block shots. They're not quite as good against the three. They're 186 against that. And then as far as volume of threes that are shot against them, they're sort of middle of the pack, sort of average. Um, they are very good defensive rebounding. They're 32nd. I think Michigan State's probably what 10th or
No, no,
better.
no, no. They're 32nd in opponent in
Oh, turnover
points and
rate. Yeah, my
turnovers.
mistake. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and the 34th in steal rate. So they get a lot of steals, and uh, they're they're a team that is going to force, or sorry, they're going to foul you quite a bit. So that's one of the problems with them. So they're 221st in opponent foul rate. But fortunately for them, they have really good foul line defense. So they're number two in the country as far as their opponents missing free throws. So I don't know if they're muttering curses under their breath or something like that, but their opponents are not hitting the free throws. Um, and then I guess what is it? What are the defensive rebound? They're 19th, so they're very, very good from a defensive
Yeah,
rebounding standpoint.
that's the real picture here, and it's why that one stat is the main reason why I felt New Mexico was a little tougher matchup for Michigan State than Marquette. Those are actually two very similar teams in their profiles in a lot of ways.
Yeah,
But the one difference to me, and you saw it last night, Marquette didn't get very much done on its offensive glass. And they're not a good offensive rebounding team anyway, but New Mexico shut them down. And that's going to be a key point, I think, in this game. Can Michigan State get things done on its offensive glass? Because New Mexico has proven to be very good as a defensive rebounding team. They will force turnovers. That's another strength. It's not just opponents turning the ball over. It's New Mexico generates live ball turnovers with steals. Uh, this isn't, if you remember what Minnesota looked like early in Richard Pitino's tenure there, where they employed a lot of full court uh, trapping pressure and they got
right.
shredded.
Yeah,
It's not that, but you will see New Mexico occasionally spring some traps. I would say the base defensive look is more of a consistent pressure-ish man to man. They do give up a lot of threes. They give up a decent percentage against, and they give up a fair amount of attempts. So the idea is they want to protect the interior, they want to protect the paint, and they're pretty good in that way. As we said, keyed by the shot blocks. They're a little bit like Bryant in that way, in that they're a highly rated, and Michigan State, frankly, in that they're a highly rated shot blocking team that doesn't have just one guy. You know, frequently teams that rate highly in that category, it'll be one guy who's, getting 3 blocks a game. And
hmm
that's the key. That's not New Mexico. They've got a number of guys who can do it, kind of like Bryant did, very much like Michigan State. So good defensive team, but not one without flaws. The 3-point defense is one issue. The other area is the fouling. They're below average team. They foul a lot, and they haven't been made to pay for it because opponents haven't hit free throws against them very well. Uh, we know Michigan State's been a little shaky recently, but I would still bet on the idea that if New Mexico is struggling in that area, if they're continuing to foul a lot, they are going to pay in this game.
yeah, and we'll talk about it too. But I think also the depth. There's if you get enough fouls called on them as well, that could
Yep,
cause some
that
real
too.
problems from as additionally. So the third thing we sort of talk about is the pace of play. And you mentioned before when we talked about the offense, they play very fast because they're a transition team. They try and get scored before you get your defense set. So they're sixth in overall pace, fifth in average length of offensive possession. I feel like we've seen a bunch of these teams recently.
Yep.
But Bryant was this way as well. And although
Yep.
you never saw any transition really from Bryant. They just would chuck shots up. Which, if I guess when looking back at that game, there were a lot of possessions that were going 15, 20 seconds sometimes in the shot clock. Not a ton, but there are quite a few, which is more than usual for them. And so it was just I guess, a testament to how well Michigan State was defending them.
Yeah, I think much like Bryant, though, the interesting thing about this game is going to be because New Mexico does not, despite where they sit in transition points, I don't believe that Richard Pitino is sitting there today thinking, hey, screw it. Let's go run with them for 40 minutes. I don't think anybody thinks that against Michigan State. So then the question becomes, and Michigan State, by the way, is probably going to do a pretty good job at limiting your ability to run.
Hmm.
That's something that doesn't get talked about very much. Oftentimes, teams that want to play fast have problems stopping opponents. Think about Iowa, for example. They're
Right.
the classic example of that. That's never been Michigan State. So I wonder, can New Mexico win if this game is played in a little different gear? That's going to be an, because they, as opposed to Michigan State, which, contrary to popular belief, actually can generate pretty efficient offense in the half court at times. New Mexico really struggles there.
Yeah.
The transition is, I would argue, even more important to them than it is to Michigan State. And can they win if they're not able to get their usual 16, 17 points in on the break? I don't know.
Yeah. Well, and that's just they're all third. They are third nationally in the fast break points scored. So they're a titch higher than Michigan State. What, 0.3 points more than Michigan State. So this is a team that is going to score a lot in fast break. That's certainly their strategy. So we shouldn't be surprised if we see that on Sunday evening.
They're going to try.
Yeah.
That's my point. They're going
Yeah.
to
Right.
try, and they need to. What happens if they don't? And it would not be surprising at all if they don't hit their seasonal average, because Michigan State does a pretty good job in floor balance.
All right. So we're talking about the opposing lineup brought to you by the Brothers Who Just Shoot Gutters, who are sponsor the player that Michigan State needs to keep in the gutter for this year or for this game. Goodness. This is going to be very anticlimactic. This will be pretty obvious after we get through the starting lineup. It's a pretty short lineup, but we'll go through that. Just as a reminder, I know it is spring, and although I'm watching the snowfall as I'm up here in the Traverse City area, it is raining or it's rainy season. So make sure you have your gutters operating properly. Make sure the downspouts work. Make sure they're clear of debris. Maybe you want to get some leaf guards put on. The Brothers Suggest You Gutters can do all that, whether you're on the east side or the west side of the state of Michigan. They can hook you up and get those things taken care of. Great pricing, great professionals. They'll get on the ladder so you don't have to. And I mean, let's be honest, who wants to do gutter work, whether it's cleaning them out or just installing new gutters? It's not any fun. I've done it myself. I'd rather not do it anymore. So it's nice that I had them take care of that for me. So you can get 10% off if you go to our support page, click on the estimate for the west side or the east side of the state, mention Final Four, and Greg or Kurt will get you that discount and they'll come out and take care of your gutters. So do it today. You'll be glad you did. And that's at tffinots.com/support. So we get into the starters. And of course, you start the point guard, Donovan Dent, 6'2" junior point guard, Mountain West Player of the Year, averaging 20.6 points a game, 6.4 assists a game, a 2-to-1 assist to turnover ratio, second on the team in assists with 48 in only 34 games, shooting 49, 41, and 78. But he doesn't have huge volume on the threes, but he does shoot them occasionally. And he averages a lot of free throw attempts a game. It's almost 7 a game. So, I mean, clearly he's a guy who is relatively shut down in the first half against Marquette. He wasn't really impactful from an offensive standpoint, but came along in the second half and is certainly late in that game.
I would say he was shut down for the first 32, 33 minutes,
Okay, yeah.
and most of it.
Hmm.
But then, and that was despite the fact that it was a 9 point spread in the end, that was a game that, at the 4 or 5 minute mark was there for the taking, both sides. And it had been anticlimactic. It had been billed as this great matchup between who was it, Cam Smith and Dent, as these two elite guards. And Dent is the guy who seized the game. He ended up with 21 points, which is pretty remarkable considering how well Marquette had him bottled up. Marquette has a guy named Stevie Mitchell, who's one of the better individual guard defenders in the country. And he really wore on Dent, I thought, for most of that game. But when it came to winning time, Dent stepped up, made several plays that helped New Mexico stretch that lead out and ultimately put it into the win column. He did struggle with turnovers. He had 6 assists, but he had 8 turnovers in that game. Although, in fairness, most of them came early. late, he was much better. The bottom line is, despite his occasional struggles in that game, he managed to make plays when they needed him to, and he's had an outstanding season. He's a very quick guard. Jim Comparoni on Spartan Mag compared him to Tyson Walker, except he said he's a better playmaker than Tyson Walker. He's also not doesn't do the damage Tyson did from three. He's a good shooter.
Right.
He just doesn't take many. But I get the comparison at a very loose level. He's a guy who's not very, put together physically. He's not going to remind you of Jeremy Fears. Uh, he relies on quickness. He's got a good handle. He can get his own shot. He can create for others. The big strength with him is his ability to get into the lane, get into the paint, finish plays himself, create for others, and then, as you alluded to, get to the foul line. He shoots almost 7 free throw attempts per game. That's a really high number for a guard. That's like Mark Turgeon era Maryland kind of stuff. It really
Yeah.
is.
Yeah.
That's what guys like Melo Trimble, Anthony Cowan, that's what those guys used to average numbers in those areas. And the fact that Dent actually shoots free throws well as opposed to most of his teammates is an added bonus. Really good player. No surprise. He's a guy that Michigan State's really going to need to load up on. I think the good news there is you saw Stevie Mitchell kind of control him for the bulk of that game. Michigan State is going to go about it a little differently, but man, we've seen this with a lot of guys this year
Yeah.
at that position in particular. Michigan State just keeps rolling fresh bodies at you over the course of 40 minutes. That's a lot to try to overcome. Not saying Dent can't do it, but it's going to be a hell of a challenge for him. And on the other hand, a hell of a challenge for Michigan State to try to contain him.
Yeah. Well, and I feel like, as you mentioned, Michigan State's been fairly successful in sort of limiting these guards, and we'll see. I think he'll definitely be. We'll talk about him in just a little bit too. I imagine it at the end of the segment here. Next would be True Washington, 6'4", sophomore, averaging 11.2 points a game, 4 rebounds a game, leading the team in steals with 70, which is like almost more than 2 a game. He's shooting 43, 35, and 64.
Yeah, he's another, they've got a lot of these guys that play with a good energy level, and he's definitely one of those. He's a solid guard physically, obviously a very active defender for them, and a decent enough shooter and scorer that you've got to respect him. The nice thing about what Richard Pitino has done, because New Mexico would definitely on the surface, and in reality it has been, it's a school that you would expect to have to be portal active.
Yeah.
um, so, for example, last year they had an exceptional freshman, Toppin, who I believe was freshman of the year in the Mountain West. Well, he ended up leaving. He transferred. He's at Texas Tech now. Um, on the other hand, you expect that they would bring a lot of guys in, and they do have. But the thing about this team is he's actually got pretty good continuity. So Washington is a sophomore who's in his second year there. Dent is in his third year in that program. And then even some of the transfers they've got are guys who are not in their first year in the program. So continuity has been part of the New Mexico story. And that's not, at least on the surface, necessarily a school you would expect to be saying that. I think it's
Right.
got something to do with the season they've had.
And then we have Mustafa Amzil, excuse me, a 6'9", 215-pound fifth-year senior playing 3 years at Dayton before coming to New Mexico. He's averaging 11 points a game, 5.5 rebounds a game, shooting 37, 28, and 70.
Again, his second year in the program, right? So that helps. Uh, Decent scorer, solid rebounder, not much of a perimeter shooter, which is true for a lot of these guys. But I will say this, at least for Michigan State's starting lineup, it creates an issue when you've got a 6'9" 3-man,
Yeah.
you know?
Well, and then we have a 6'9", 220-pound junior transfer from Arizona, Philippe Borovicanin, averaging 5.9 points a game, 4.5 rebounds a game. He's shooting 42, 31, and 65.
Yeah, Borva has had a solid year. The county numbers aren't huge, but another guy who's kind of a piece to the puzzle. And I will say his playing time, even though he's only about a 20-minute a night player, it's substantially increased from what he was able to do the first 2 years he spent at Arizona, where his role was really limited. So, again, good size, at least physically, he's a decent matchup for Jackson Kohler at the start of the game. Like defensively, you would expect he'd be able to hang in there.
And finally, we have the five, Nelly Jr. Joseph, 6'10", 240-pound senior, transfer last year from Iona. He's averaging 14.1 points a game, 11.1 boards a game. Many of those are offensive, about 3 a game, and 1.5 blocks a game. He's shooting 56, 0, and 66, and he averages about 5 free throws a game.
He's a really good player. I mean, I had not seen much New Mexico. I saw little bits in the Mountain West tournament. I don't think I saw them in the regular season, but watching that game yesterday, he's impressive because he's a legit five at 6'10", 240.
Right.
But the nice thing is just in the modern game, it's just so frequent to see these big men in drop coverage. I mean, you come to expect it. Somebody his size, you just come to expect it. Not the case with him. He's actually really mobile. They'll use him sometimes on hedging, ball screens. He's switchable to some extent, from what I could see. Really, really impressive player. Finishes well around the rim. He's active. The rebounding is what really stands out, though. 3 offensive boards per game, but on the other end, we mentioned how good this team is in terms of its defensive rebounding. He's a big part of the reason why. He is in the top 10 in the country in individual defensive rebounding rate. So that means if Michigan State's missing a shot and he's on the floor, there's a good chance he's going to clean it up. Just a really nice player. I mean, and from my understanding, it's just been over his 3 years playing for Richard Pitino's dad at Iona, and then the 2 years now he spent at New Mexico. It's just been a steady progression year by year. That's how it's supposed to work. And it culminates in this where he's a very good player.
I wonder how Richard Pitino heard about him.
Yeah.
Uh, Moving on to reserves then, CJ Noland, 6'4", senior wing, transferred in from North Texas. He had also played at Oklahoma. He's averaging 8.1 points a game in 21 minutes, shooting 41, 32, and 74.
Yeah. We're going to talk about a few other guys here.
This is about the end of the bench, so for
But
the
the
most part, right?
reality is, yeah, in
Yeah.
terms of consistent, sustained minutes, this is kind of it. And he will play a lot. Solid player, nothing spectacular in that profile, but key in that he's the bench guy.
This is interesting. We'll talk about that, I imagine, too. It's just the short bench and a team that wants to
Yep.
run against Michigan State.
Yep.
Moving on, Jovan Milicevic, 6'10", 240-pound freshman, averaging a little under 4 points a game, 2 rebounds a game, plays about 12 minutes. He didn't play nearly that much, I think, 6 or 7 minutes against Marquette. Shooting 48, 45, and 58. More than half his shots are from behind the arc, though.
Stretch big. That's his profile. Uh, he's, again, 12 minutes a game is not bad in terms of playing time, but his minutes have started to be reduced, and not just the Marquette game. So I wonder if uh, Pitino perhaps has not been confident in him on the defensive end, let's say, because the offensive profile is pretty good for a team that really struggles to shoot. To have a guy who very clearly is an effective shooter, he's taking more than half his shots from out there and he's hitting 45%. That would seem to be something they could use, but there's a reason they haven't been playing him. I think in this game, he played sparingly against Marquette. I actually expect him to see the floor. One, because they've got to try to match Michigan State's depth to some extent, but I also think they want to try to match Michigan State's size and physicality in the paint. And he gives them that. He's a big body.
Then we have Braden Applehans, 6'7" sophomore, averaging 3.4 points a game, plays about 10 minutes, shooting 41, 44, and 74. and about 80% of his shots are also behind the arc.
Another guy played 1 minute against Marquette, and his playing time has really, he's another guy who, if you look not just at that game, but in recent games, maybe the 4 or 5 before that, his playing time's been crashing. I think what's going on is Richard Pitino is doing what a lot of coaches do. Just late in the year, they start to tighten their rotation.
Yeah.
But
What?
again, team that struggles to shoot, and this guy could shoot, it is interesting to me that they're choosing to cut his minutes.
Well, and you wonder if there are other deficiencies on the other end of
I
the
think
floor
that's got
that's
to be
costing
it.
him, right?
I think
That'd be
that's
my
got to be it.
hunch. Yeah. So then finally, we have Atiki Ali Atiki, 6'10", 225-pound senior from BYU, averaging 2 points a game, 2.5 rebounds a game, about a block a game, shooting 57% from the floor and a measly 45% from the line.
I think we'll probably see him a little bit. I don't think a ton of time, but again, another bigger body, a rim protector. I think there's probably a role for him in this game to some extent.
And I can't imagine who possibly could be the player that Michigan State needs to keep in the gutter. Who is it?
Yeah, it's Donovan Dent, obviously. The
Yeah.
whole thing goes through him. I mean, we'll return to this theme in the keys. I think he's more than most point guards. Point guard's always an important guy for almost any team. Heightened importance for this team.
All right. And then so for Who Cleans the Glass Best, brought to you by the Squeegee Squad of Grand Rapids. Friends, it is spring. It's time to get everything cleaned up, spring cleaning, and that includes your windows. And let's be honest, you're not going to do it yourself. So hire the professionals who can do it for you quickly, efficiently. They get up on the ladders, they get the outside of the windows. Whether it's your house, your business, high rise, state capitol, whatever it is, they can do the job. It's a very large area around Grand Rapids. So contact the Squeegee Squad of Grand Rapids to take care of all those window cleaning needs for you to clean the glass best. We'll give you a 15% discount if you mention Final Four when you get your estimate. And of course, you can get the estimate at our support page, tffinots.com/support. Contact them today. You'll be glad you did. And right now, of course, I'm getting blasted at the season is over as far as the competition between Rod and me. I'm down 6 with only 5 games to go, right? 5 games. And you get to pick first this time in our snake draft.
Jackson Kohler.
Oh, what a shock. And I'm going to go with Cooper. And actually, this is, I think I'm actually fortunate that I get to pick the third pick too. I'm going to go with Carr again. That seems to be, I, it just feels like he's just kind of ramping up in this tournament. And I know he had career rebounds and career points last game. It just feels to me like he has kind of figured out his athleticism and sort of what he's expected to do and what he can do against these, in competition, at least with, on the offensive glass, which we've talked about a bunch, but we've not really seen it except the last couple weeks. I think we're really starting to see him emerge
Yeah.
on the offensive
It
board.
was a career high for him yesterday in
Yeah.
points and rebounds.
Hmm.
It's a good choice. I'm going to throw a wild card at you for my last pick. I'm
Oh,
going
okay.
with Zapala.
So Paul,
I
ooh,
think as
okay.
opposed to the last game, I expect New Mexico to try to stay big. And so I think it's a game that I can imagine him playing more sustained minutes in.
Yeah. Well, I mean, he's had some games where he's gotten on the boards. He
He
had to
had
start out. He had a lot. The first 4 minutes he played, he had 3, but he
he
just
had
wasn't
three
able to.
rebounds. Yeah. I
Just
mean,
wasn't able to do anything else
it was
defensively.
playing time related, but again, I think this is going to be a little bit different game. But we spent so much time talking about Bryant's size, but that was positional size. It wasn't really what people traditionally think about as, oh, they got a lot of big men. They had
Right.
one big man, and when they went away from him, they were actually kind of in a small ball look. So it just wasn't a game for Zapala, but I think this one may be.
Yeah, and this is and with him, unlike say Zach Edey, where you can use him to impose your will on the other team. He's not a guy on the offense end where you can punish someone so badly that what he
Right.
gives you
No,
you give up in defense, you can't make up for that, right? And that's the difference.
he is very definitely a player. It's funny because he got off to such a great start this year that I think we all went, wow, this guy is actually capable of doing more than anybody expected. And that's to his credit. And I do think he's had a really good year on balance for MSU. But I think what he's settled into being at this stage is closer to what we expected at the outset of the season, by which I mean he's a card you play against specific kinds of opponents. He gives Michigan State that true five man when the other team's got a guy like that, and New Mexico does, who can match up physically in the post with that player, can also force that player to work defensively. Um, but if you're playing somebody that's a little more athletic, a little more of a stretch type big, he's not necessarily the best matchup.
Yeah, it's interesting because on some of you look at it and from a starting standpoint, we always talk about who's starting the game, and it does make a difference. I mean, he started last game. He played 4 minutes. He played the one stint in the first half, and he never played again. He didn't come out of the second half and play. I think you could make an argument and say, well, why don't you just have Cooper start? I do think the advantage of Zapala or I should say Zapawa, right? That he is that the way he plays and the sort of the player he is, I think he allows the coaching staff an idea for who they're up against. Because I don't think I don't think you ever really know until you see the team on the floor, as far as what their bigs are like, what sort of defensive, what you have to do defensively, and if he and so there are times where I think they're not sure if he's going to be the right answer or he's going to give you enough on the other end.
Yep.
And if you have Cooper in there, I think you don't get those things. I don't think you get the answers as quickly as you would with Zapawa because it's just what he can do and what he can't do. And so, it doesn't cost you a whole lot. I guess you'd say, well, if we're down 13-0 at the, under four or something, then
Yeah,
there's
but
a
that
mistake.
hasn't
But that doesn't
been
happen.
happening.
But that'd be like the
No.
only risk for it. But I do think it provides information. And this is a team we have seen all year. It's the junk drawer, right? You got a bunch of parts
Yep,
and you're like,
exactly.
we don't know what we need, what's good working, who's working. But he answers, at least from a front court standpoint, he answers a little bit of that question, right?
I think that's all true. And then additionally, I think that it's hard to argue with the idea that if it ain't broke,
Right. It's
and
working.
and by that I mean primarily this substitution pattern and the way the minutes and playing time evolve has obviously agreed with Carson Cooper. Carson Cooper has been playing for God, month and a half, 2 months, the best sustained basketball of his MSU career, to the point that I'm pretty convinced now that some of the inconsistency that he suffered earlier in his career, I think is more or less ironed out. I'm going to be surprised if we don't at least see him at the level he's been at of late for the rest of his career. That doesn't
Yeah.
mean he can't have a bad game here and there, but you know what I'm saying. Um, so it's working. Carson Cooper is able to settle into games in that role. It's not costing him minutes. I mean, this whole, come on.
Yeah. Well, it's
If they weren't, you know what? If they last night is a prime example of this. So Zapala played that first turn, and that was kind of about it, right?
yeah,
Those first 4 minutes. Well, those 4 minutes are going to come at some point. He's not going to not play.
right.
So what does it matter?
Well, it doesn't, except I guess you could say, again, if you're having trouble getting out of the gates, you say, well, then you need to make a
But
change.
then you make a change for that reason. But they haven't had that problem, so
exactly.
it's a non-issue.
Right, exactly. But I think we sometimes get too hung up like, oh, your five best have to start, and there is some truth to that. But in some ways, if your substitution pattern works and the way this team plays, the way the team is structured, I mean, is Trey Hallman one of your best five players? Well, I mean, you could make an argument for him starting as well, and he did for a large portion of the season.
Right.
And now Jace is starting over him, and has it?
Cohen Carr.
Yeah, I mean,
yeah,
yeah, and someone's got to start, and someone's got to be up for, and someone has to be on the bench.
On a
so
team
whatever.
that's this deep and a team that plays guys as many minutes as this one does, it just doesn't matter.
Right.
To paraphrase the great Bill Murray in Meatballs, it just doesn't matter.
Yeah. I guess the only difference I'd say with this team is the move from Richardson into starting spot for Holloman has resulted in more offensive production from Jace Richardson. He's definitely gotten more minutes, so it has made a difference there a little bit. So
Yes.
that's about the only difference. All right, so let's move on to our 5 keys to the game, brought to you by Nudge Printing. Friends, if you need great Spartan apparel, there's no better place than Nudge Printing. They've got I don't know if they still have the 27% off sale for the 27th straight NCAA tournament for Tom Izzo. But you can head on over to nudgeprinting.com. If you can't get that 27%, you can certainly get the 20% off if you just type in Final Four as one word and check out all kinds of great stuff, high quality, super comfortable stuff. We're going to open our store for our gear if you want to get our logo stuff for the Final Four. It's not on the schedule in the next week, I think. I got to talk to Gabe and set that up this week, hopefully before the next round. You can get that super comfortable stuff, whether it's a hoodie, a t-shirt. A favorite of my family, as someone mentioned the live show last night, that they bought it for a gift for someone and then liked it and just kept it. So it's really good stuff. But, just buy two. That way you can give one to your friends still. All right. All right. So first key to the game is the transition. We talked about this already. New Mexico likes to run. Michigan State likes to run, obviously. This is strength versus strength. We'll see who comes out on top, I guess.
Yeah, and if either team carves out a significant edge in this category, that's a big deal because they both rely on it as significant parts of their offense. As I said earlier, though, I actually think it's even more important for New Mexico just
Mm-hmm.
because I'm not a believer in their half court offense, whereas Michigan State can run good half court offense. So, yeah, it's important, and they both want to do it. How well do they each limit the other's opportunities? That's going to be big. And then obviously cashing in when the chances are there.
And the second key to the game is boards. These are two, again, with like strength versus strength, two very good defensive rebounding teams. New Mexico, not a very good offensive rebounding team. Michigan State, of course, is elite at that end as well. Just totally, tattooed Bryant last night.
Yeah.
So this is going to be, again, a question we always have for Michigan State. Are they going to get extra opportunities to score? This would be certainly one way to do it. If they have an advantage here, you imagine you like their chances of winning the game if they have a big edge in the offensive boards.
Very, very different kind of opponent. New Mexico doesn't have the same kind of positional size that Bryant had on the perimeter, but they've got a lot of conventional size.
Yeah.
I won't be surprised if we see, as many as five guys in this game, 6'9" and up on the floor at one point or another for New Mexico. And again, as we said, Junior Joseph is a big time rebounder, both ends. I think this is a dynamic we have seen in some games this year where the other team doesn't do much on its offensive boards. And then when you factor in how good Michigan State is on its defensive glass, you don't expect them to do very much in that area. So then it comes down to a very, very good offensive rebounding team for Michigan State against a very, very good defensive rebounding team for New Mexico. That's different than the other dynamic where it's a weakness for New Mexico against a serious strength for MSU. The other end, it's strength against strength. Can MSU get second chance points? And not just that, if they're hitting the offensive glass in addition to second chance points, you're also doing a lot of work. You're going a long way to limiting New Mexico's ability to get into transition. Because we all know clean defensive rebounding is often a big part of that.
Yeah. Well, and as an example for Michigan State, we've seen teams like this in the Big Ten a number of times. Illinois is a good example of a team that's very good rebounding team, and Michigan State was still able to get a lot of stuff done and limit a good offensive rebounding team. So there's every reason I think Michigan State can pull this off from a board standpoint. I think.
They're gonna have to. I mean, I think that
Yeah.
you look at the profile of this game. I don't mean they got to do what they did to Bryant, but they've got to be effective.
And third key to the game is the free throw line. Again, New Mexico gets there quite a bit. They don't shoot great, a little under 70%. Michigan State gets there a lot as well. They shoot traditionally over the season. They've been shooting around 80%. They're down now probably in the 70s. I haven't looked at the recently.
78 and change. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and a little struggled yesterday after kind of a shaky start, but then they kind of got rolling. So again, this is a spot where you'd like to see Michigan State get downhill and start driving and creating some fouls, especially a team that's as shallow as this team with really six players. They play maybe 6.5. If you get one or two of those guys in foul trouble, it's going to cause some real problems with the rotations and with their ability to be successful on the offensive and defensive end.
Absolutely. Absolutely. They have been kind of a foul prone team. They're worse than average in that area. Michigan State is a much, much, much better than average team in generating fouls. So you look at it on the surface and you say, well, MSU should be able to do that. That has two benefits. One, the obvious one, getting free throw attempts. The second one is what you mentioned, which is also important. If you can put key guys, I mean, if they could get Dent or Junior Joseph in foul trouble, and not that those are the most obvious guys for it to happen, but if they did, that's a huge issue for New Mexico. This is another area where it's got to be an advantage for MSU. That they have to.
Yeah.
It's something that is obvious on its face heading into the game, and you need to make that actuality. You need to make that happen.
Yeah, and I think the one thing that is easy to discount, kind of forget sometimes, even when you put people and get people in foul trouble. Let's say Dent doesn't get in foul trouble, but you get one of their other starters, or one or two of them, like Milosevic and Applehounds, or not those guys, but like Amsel and Washington or something like that. It's gonna it If you're running up and down the floor and now you've got two less players you're able to substitute in and out, it's gonna create a lot more fatigue, and it's gonna cause disruption in that substitution pattern for New Mexico, and cause a lot more problems that probably we wouldn't even appreciate as someone who doesn't watch New Mexico much, right? As far
Right.
as like, oh, it's time for so and so's turn, Um,
Absolutely. No, it's if you Izzo is over the years, it's less important this year because the depth he's got, but he's talked about that foul trouble in certain games. Well, you could say the Wisconsin game, right?
yeah,
Where
with
you had
Kohler,
Jackson
yeah,
Kohler in foul trouble. Yeah. It even on a deep team, it can screw with your rotations. All of a sudden you got player combinations that aren't out there together as much. You're not getting the production you're used to getting from a given player who's now in foul trouble. Yeah, it can be a domino effect. That's the thing. We don't have depth as an explicit key to this game, but it's in the background of a lot of these things.
right. And I think the one advantage Michigan State's had this year that has driven people crazy at times, and we're not as hung up about it, is these player combinations on the floor. Sometimes like, why do they have this combination out here? They've only got one shooter or something like that. Michigan State has played just about every combination multiple times throughout the year. So even if they do get into trouble, which I wouldn't expect in this game, but it's possible, you expect them to be able to, keep their head above water for long enough until they can get out of trouble, and they're at least have some sort of familiarity with playing with each other. Whereas in other years, they're used to having these two or three guys always on the floor at the same time, and so when they're not, it causes some real problems. So the fourth key of the game is turnovers. Michigan State has been pretty good with turnovers. They had a little bad stint for midway through the season, and I got a little bit of trouble last game against Bryant, where they have 8, I think, in the first half. They finished with only 3 more in the second half, so they really cleaned things up. They just have to avoid this, and I feel like, if anything, they need to really avoid these turnovers early. It seems like when they get turnover problems, it seems
Yeah.
to be early in the game when they sort of not settled in yet, playing a little too fast or something like that, and so you don't want to give New Mexico early easy points like on steals and things like that early in the game.
And that's something this team does.
Yeah, right.
They won't sell out like crazily, as I talked about, but they are aggressive defensively. They generate a lot of live ball turnovers, which again is a tool that can help them get into transition. You don't want to give this team easy baskets. They don't shoot it well, so you want to make sure they're earning as much as possible in the half court. And turnovers can allow them to get around that, to get past that a little bit. So it's important for Michigan State not only to be poised, but also to be strong with the ball, because this is kind of, they're not the same team as Bryant by any means, but kind of similarly to Bryant. This is a team that's got some toughness about them and they're aggressive. So they're going to be looking to strip the ball in traffic. They're going to do those kind of things. MSU's got to be strong with the ball in those circumstances.
And the fifth key to the game is Dent, and that's not actually, or they don't need to dent anything. This is actually obviously Donovan Dent, the all everything point guard for New Mexico, who is kind of runs the show, the head of the snake, as Jeremy Fears is always talking about.
Yeah, and this team more than most, their point guard is exactly that. I think the equation is pretty obvious. Michigan State's going to throw multiple defenders at him, and the idea is going to be not only to limit him getting to the lane, but to wear him down physically. I think you want the last 7-8 minutes. You want to see Dent dragging. You want to see him maybe making some decisions. Frequently it's something that I've said for a long time about what Michigan does to the Wolf kid. That they put so much on his plate that late in games and late in the season, you start seeing mistakes that are born out of fatigue as much as anything else. And
Right.
that's what you want if you're MSU. The one bit of good news, I think, is that even though New Mexico won and even though Dent ended up making a lot of plays late to help them win it, Dent had to go 15 rounds in that game with Stevie Mitchell.
Yeah.
And I think that alone maybe depleted him. Now we'll see how he recovers, but I don't think that can be anything but a positive for MSU that he had to go through that experience and then 2 days later he's turning around and facing what Michigan State's going to throw at him. Michigan State doesn't have anybody defensively with the reputation of Mitchell, but they are a better, maybe much better defensive backcourt overall than Marquette is. And that's how they're going to do it. They're going to do it the same way they have all year long. They're going to throw multiple guys at him. It'll be Jeremy Fears and Trey Holloman to start. Jaden Akins will see time on him. Jace Richardson will see time on him. It'll be a lot of guys. They'll be physical with him. And the hope is you get to winning time. And as opposed to what happened in the Marquette game, what you want is for Dent's tank to be running dry in this one. That's the idea. And if they do that successfully, and again, success does not mean he doesn't score, he doesn't have any assists, but make him inefficient. If they do that, it's hard to see New Mexico having a path to winning this game. They need Dent to be somewhere near his best. That's my view. I don't think they can win without that.
Yeah. Well, we saw, I think John Tanji was a good example of a guy who just got by the time he got to the championship game against Michigan, he was just sort of finished off. He had
Right.
played Michigan State and he had given everything he had, and then there he was done. So yeah, hopefully they have this that Dent's a little bit slowed down, and he did have. I mean, he did struggle a little bit in that game, right? He had like 8 turnovers for a guy who's averaging a 2-to-1 assist turnover ratio. So he has shown signs of breaking down.
Well, and in fairness, going against a very high level defender.
Yeah, right.
So he was challenged by a guy who's at a different level than most of what he sees during the course of the season. Well, guess what?
And now you
He's
get 3 of them.
facing the number 5 defense in the country
Yeah.
in this one.
All
So
right,
the challenge will be there for him.
for sure. So Michigan State plays at 8:40 late game on Sunday night. So glad I didn't go to Cleveland and even entertain that idea to try and get back to work on Monday. It'd be nicer just to see everyone right afterward the game. So as just as before, this time will be a little bit more reasonable hours. We will be live after the game, soon afterwards, after I get sort of all the things put together. So join us live on YouTube if you have an opportunity. You can find that at TFFINOTS. So just youtube.com/at TFFINOTS. Make sure you subscribe, that way you get notified. Make sure you like and leave comments below. If you're on a podcast player and listening to us, the audio version, obviously subscribe if you've not already. Continue to share it with your friends. We remain a top 50 podcast in basketball in America, and that's with pro and college. So thank you so much to all the Michigan State supporters who listen to the show, and we really appreciate it. And I guess the last thing I have to mention too, that is my daughter's acceptance flag thing behind me. So if you're kind of curious, if you're watching TV, she got that when she got accepted to Michigan State.
They didn't
And
give those out in my day.
no, it's you would be kind of disgusted at all the stuff they do now and all the different facilities and things they have at college camps that they didn't have when we were going to school. So it's definitely changed quite a bit. Anyway, it is her birthday as well, so I just wanted a quick shout out to her birthday as well. So, all right. So until next time, the Final Four is on the schedule. Go Green.